The boomer millennial furniture divide is such a microcosm of the way that the world has changed.
They take a bunch of structures that don't relate to one another to make a cheap construction that's meant to give off the impression that it's a proper mansion when it's really not. Kind of like how a Big Mac is supposed to give off the impression that it's real beef.
Oh my god, new menu! Coming soon too! McDonald's Pineapple McSpicy.
Which is so frustrating because name brands you think should be good quality, but that does not mean that they are, which it's better to just buy old.
You might spend $5,000, $10,000 on a brand new fridge, and this thing is going to croak in 2 years and 3 years.
And these messy buttonholes, it's like they didn't even try. And it's $100.
But then again, capitalism and puritanical beliefs are not a breeding ground for quality and originality. Example, whatever this is.
Hello everyone, and welcome to our October video essay here on the financial diet. And today we are going to answer one simple, but in my opinion, very pressing question: when did everything get so cheap? And I don't mean cheap as in affordable, because often things are very much not that. I mean cheap as in poor quality. Because when you're doing basically anything these days, when you're traveling, shopping for clothes, buying a home, buying groceries, it is very hard not to be confronted with the reality that things feel way cheaper than they used to be, and often for the same price or even more expensive. One need only look at the photos from the set of The Devil Wears Prada 2 to see just how much things have changed in less than 20 years. There's been much discourse online, and we'll deep dive into that a little bit later in the video, about how even less than 20 years later, the same designer clothing brands that are being used for the costuming in this movie have so drastically decreased in quality that it's literally visible in paparazzi photos. Basically, the span of time between that classic movie and its upcoming sequel is enough time to see the decline of an entire industry. And yet Anne Hathaway's face hasn't aged a day. But before we dive into this month's video, I wanted to take a quick second to thank our sponsor, Betterment. As we're now in the full swing of the fall season, it is a good time to remind ourselves that some money progress is better than none at all. For a lot of us, fall is about resetting and being intentional with our goals. And for our big picture goals, a well-diversified investment strategy is key to building enough wealth to get there. And if you've been putting off investing because it feels overwhelming to get started, Betterment makes it simple. That's because Betterment does all the heavy lifting for you. When investing your money starts to feel like a second job, Betterment steps in with a little work-life balance. While Betterment builds and manages your portfolio, you can build and manage your weekend plans. Betterment's automated tools simplify the complex and put your money to work, built to optimize day after day. While Betterment makes it easy to invest for what matters, you get to enjoy what matters. Because while your money doesn't need a work-life balance, you do. Make your money hustle with Betterment by heading to betterment.com/TFD or clicking the link in our description box to sign up in minutes. Or moving away from clothing, for those of us who are Airbnb users since roughly its inception, we know all too well the standard VC-backed playbook of achieve market saturation through undercutting the existing market, in this case hotels, while providing a comparable to superior product, only to pull the rug once that saturation has been achieved, and radically decrease the quality while ratcheting up the price to something similar or higher than the previous market dominator. And yes, for those keeping score at home, Airbnbs are now more expensive than hotels on average in major markets, while also usually requiring you to act as the cleaning service that you're already paying for. But more on that later. We've basically created a new paradigm through the explosion of consumer culture and the simultaneous maximizing of corporate profit at the expense of cutting basically every corner for both the consumer and their own employees. Wherein the entry-level version of something is now so bad that you basically have to pay for premium just to have what used to be standard. Nowhere is this more evident than in the slow degradation of the travel experience, where point, mile, or loyalty systems have gone from a way for power user customers to get a luxurious experience to a basic necessity for every traveler to have a not degrading experience. Everything from being able to carry luggage to being served a basic meal during a long-haul flight has now been moved up to the premium tier, something that low-cost airlines are making you pay a la carte for, and even higher-end airlines are only offering to their loyalty program members. And even the food we eat has become a battleground of corporate profit versus consumer experience. A dilemma that has turned our national health outcomes upside down, as ultra-processed, cheaply made food has become much more accessible and in many cases affordable than healthier, more local options. This is, by the way, not to agree with some people in our government who want to denigrate modern medicine and insist that a healthy diet / exercising in the sunlight is enough to basically live forever. Because I believe that we can acknowledge that there is something fundamentally broken with how we eat in America, while also acknowledging that it's a good thing that school children are no longer getting polio at playgrounds. Though on that note, healthcare is also a space where what is considered entry level is now such a diminished experience that people are paying for luxury at every turn out of pocket if they can afford it. Side note, few things more dystopian to me right now than all of those otherwise respectable celebrities who are doing SpawnCon on Instagram for that like full body MRI scan you can pay out of pocket for. Like, are we really that hard up for cash? I guess so.
Money, please.
All of this is to say, we're in an era where quality has taken such a nosedive on so many fronts that we are forced to constantly strategize and optimize basically every purchase experience to avoid a bottom barrel treatment. At the same time, the cheapening of so many of these products has gotten us accustomed to, if not some might say addicted to, consuming at a level that is A, not normal, and B, not at all sustainable. For example, it used to be unthinkable that an average middle-class person would take multiple flights in a calendar year, and now you can fly to international destinations for less than a cost of a full tank of gas in some SUVs. Ryanair, never again. Or we can look in our closets, where we're buying on average more than 20 times the quantity of clothing that someone just 2 generations ago would have bought. This has also created a massive dissonance in what we expect things to cost. The average t-shirt, for example, now costs roughly $20, a price that completely precludes most ethical labor standards, sustainability, and quality of production, or local sourcing. We just expect things to be really, really cheap now and don't care so much how they get that way. Now, obviously, being more conscious about our consumer habits is a big first step here, and we'll get into that later. But the first step is understanding the why and how of everything, including our own brains. Which brings us to chapter 1.
Things weren't always this cheap.
So what is the engine driving this race to the bottom? Because the real reason that we're drowning in a sea of cheap, disposable junk is not just corporate greed, although that's a big part of the problem. It's the way our brains are literally wired to interact with our economy. So basically, we get a little spike of dopamine every time we buy something new, but it fades away almost immediately, and then we need at minimum another dopamine spike for consuming, or ideally an even higher spike from something even nicer.
No one can resist a Krabby Patty.
This is the hedonic treadmill, and it's important to know that in an economy like ours, which is based on perpetual growth, it is a feature, not a bug. We need people to constantly be consuming and constantly be wanting to consume in order to support that perpetual growth.
To talk more about our brains on overconsumption, I sat down with friend of TFD, Paige Pritchard of Overcoming Overspending.
So in the past 10 to 15 years, consumerism has become much more externally motivated than internally motivated. I think our drive for more and our drive for stuff, there's always going to be the internal things driving that, but changes in the last 10 to 15 years, whether we're talking about the rise of fast fashion with Shein, Temu, whether we're talking about advances in technology with the internet and shopping like Amazon, or if we're talking about things like social media, I mean, that's kind of also had a massive impact on our spending. There's so many things now that have been introduced in our external environment that even as recent as 10 to 15 years ago just simply did not exist. And so it really has been this huge swing in recent history of we've always kind of had this drive internally, and that certainly is a part of it. And that will always be true, and that will always remain. But now you kind of have what I like to call like this perfect storm of all these external factors and motivators that we now have to deal with on a pretty much daily basis.
Our pre-existing brain chemistry is essentially being exploited to condition us that we always need that next dopamine hit, whether it is another limited edition Stanley Cup or the 5th pair of designer sunglasses in a single year. Social media, by the way, which puts essentially all of our purchases on display, whether that's a trip somewhere or a dress we're wearing or the food we're eating, only compounds this, because that same novelty of buying something new is also a similar novelty of showing off something new. There's a reason some people feel self-conscious about wearing the same outfit over and over on social media, or why so many home influencers insist on completely redoing their decor for every season or holiday. Because it doesn't just feel good to buy something new, it looks good too.
Are you wearing the
Chanel boots? Yeah, I am.
And this endless cycle of buying, enjoying for 5 minutes, and discarding has insidiously lowered our standards. We've recalibrated what high quality even means.
The quality of fabric is getting worse. So when you raise beautiful, diverse, lush forests to the ground and you turn them into monoculture fields of cotton, the soil quality gets worse over time, and thus the cotton quality gets worse over time.
Because they have stakeholders and shareholders and people to abide by and money to make, and
discounted cash flows to consistently increase. Like there's a need to cut costs, increase revenues, and figure out ways to like essentially like not take advantage of, but like extrapolate the maximum amount of value you can from your consumer.
For example, think about an appliance from your grandparents' generation versus one from today. One was built with accessible screws, designed to be opened and tinkered with. The other is sealed shut with industrial glue, designed for a landfill the second a single component fails. When products aren't designed to last, we stop expecting them to last. We've been trained to accept disposability as the default, turning our homes into temporary holding zones for items on their way to a landfill that look terrifyingly like a scene from WALL-E.
We have gotten to a point where we have developed this dependency on convenience because it's what the market has almost like primed us to know and primed us to expect. Whether it's with the products that we buy and how they deliver convenience into our lives, or even if it's how conveniently we're able to get those products now. I mean, even think about the speed at which we're able to get our products now. I mean, a matter of days, sometimes even hours, which primes us in this like instant gratification, convenience. We have totally lost the art, I think, of savoring our stuff, where we get something, we keep it for a long time, we maintain it, we take really good care of it. We buy something and we think, okay, this is something that's going to last me for years, if not decades, right? And now we're more so in the patterns of just buying for convenience. And because things are so easy to get, and they're also so cheap, there's almost kind of like this psychological cheapening that happens in our minds where when we get something so fast, we don't have to wait for it, then we don't really have to put much at stake to get it. Then when it breaks down, or when it malfunctions, or maybe when it needs some repairs, we don't go through that extra effort to maintain it.
And the most simple reason that our baseline for quality has absolutely cratered in the past few decades is that the entire system has shifted from durability as a feature to sheer quantity. For example, the average new single-family house has doubled in size since the 1950s, giving us cavernous walk-in closets to fill. And even that isn't enough. Roughly 1 in 9 US households now rents an off-site storage unit to handle the overflow of our own stuff. It's like the dark flip side of the Marie Kondo craze. Instead of sparking joy, we're just outsourcing our own clutter.
Wow, look at that.
And the numbers confirm this isn't just a feeling. According to the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, global clothing production has roughly doubled between 2000 and 2015 alone. We're making and buying more than ever, and yet price is no longer a reliable signal for quality. And we'll get into that in more detail later.
Aloe yoga. I'm sorry, but there's absolutely no reason why a $100 sweatshirt has to be made with polyester.
For those keeping score at home, it's worth noting that that span of time, 2000 to 2015, in which clothing production roughly doubled, is pretty similar to the distance between the original Devil Wears Prada in 2006 and the new one just under 20 years later. If the clothing in it looks so much worse, it's likely because we're making so much more of it.
Orange shoes are so much cooler than these stupid pink shoes. You guys, orange is the new pink. Yeah!
Now, we're often gaslit as consumers into thinking that this decline in quality is just an inevitability. But that isn't true, and on this front, policy and regulation work. In Europe, for example, a formal right to repair directive and new durability labels for phones are already rolling out, forcing transparency on manufacturers who would rather you just buy the new model every year. France is taking it a step further, placing new eco-fees on ultra-fast fashion and outright banning its advertising. And this isn't just a European phenomenon. Here in the US, California's own right to repair law is now active, compelling tech giants, yes, even Apple, to make parts, tools, and repair guides accessible to normal people. These rules prove we have the tools to make built to last the standard again and not a luxury. So what does a real solution look like? Because it's not about shaming individuals for their choices, it's about changing the rules of the game so everyone has better options to choose from. The solutions could look like 1, mandatory durability labels on products, because imagine if your phone or t-shirt had a score from A to F on repairability right next to its price tag. Suddenly, the cheap option might not look like such a bargain. Having easy and affordable access to parts and tools, because the core of right to repair means that you could actually fix your own laptop instead of just being quoted $800 by the official store. Warranties that extend after a successful repair, because this incentivizes companies to make products that are actually worth fixing. And targeted fees and advertising limits for the cheapest, highest churn goods, which makes the polluters of our planet and our closets pay for the damage they're causing. Just this example mix of policies would raise the standards so that that durability is now what we are optimizing for. And we can do it all without ever having to lecture a single shopper about using too many bags at checkout.
Do you ever feel like a plastic bag?
But as I mentioned, it's important to note that when we're shopping as consumers, it is no longer even fair to say that paying more for something necessarily correlates to a higher level of quality, which brings us to Chapter 2, the death of the investment piece.
To deep dive into how our clothes used to be and what exactly happened to the fashion industry, I sat down with vintage clothing enthusiast and secondhand shopping expert, Elliot Dupre.
Luxury and this like idea of like high quality does not also like correlate to other standard of like durability, or it kind of like these like factors that you think about on like what luxury means also change based on like consumer preferences, and consumer preferences have changed over the last 20 years a lot. Something I think about all the time is like the weight of fabrics. Our cashmere is like better than it was 20 years ago, like technically, right? Like we found ways to make like the microns of the like fibers thinner and like everything softer and weave it better and whatever. But at the end of the day, the consumer wants for their cashmere coat to be like a lot lighter weight, because it doesn't, like, the fabric itself is not weighty or not like heavy. It doesn't like have as good of like a structure or like a look to it in like a still image.
So as I mentioned, the photos from the set of The Devil Wears Prada 2 have been an interesting flashpoint in seeing just how much the quality has declined, not necessarily in the fast fashion space, which is what we're used to thinking of when we think of cheap, poorly made, not designed to last apparel, but this time in the designer space, where almost every single aspect of how a garment has produced has visibly declined in quality over just the past 18 years.
My initial reaction looking at these outfits,
This entire look feels a little too department store for the person who's supposed to be the tastemaker of the entire industry.
Why even do a sequel if the fashion is not going to be top tier?
What's so fascinating about this decline in quality between the two movies is that for the most part, the clothes being used in the film, at least the ones that we're seeing, are still the same designer brands. It's not as if the first movie had the characters in all designer clothing and now they're all wearing Zara. They're still wearing the same highest end labels, it's just the quality has changed radically even in this time period.
Look at the hem of this skirt. It is a rolled hem stitched on top instead of an invisible hem like any luxury brand would have done 20 years ago.
Now, much ink has been spilled on the rapid decline of the in-store shopping experience when it comes to clothes. As many people have pointed out, you used to be able to walk into stores, especially the more mid-range options at places like shopping malls that generally had higher quality clothes, and find plenty of well-constructed, built-to-last items that you actually liked and enjoyed wearing. But now even stores which used to be reliably mid-range, like J.Crew or Madewell, feel essentially on par with an H&M when you go into the stores. Like, things are so shittily made and so ugly and unwearable. Like, J.Crew used to make work clothes. I can't go to the office and like 70% of the stuff they have on their shelves now. Jenna Lyons, you will pay for your sins. Why did you start making them make like sequined and feathered mini skirts? Stay in your lane, J.Crew. Anyway.
The decline of any mid-range products is why I suggest people just buy vintage mid-range products. Like, go and get yourself some J.Crew from 30 years ago. It's amazing. I think these brands, in a lot of ways, are trying to come back from maybe that like negative, like fast fashion connotation, at least in the last 2 to 3 years from what I've noticed. The decline of like brick and mortar definitely like aided in this decline of the mid-range, I don't know, like fashion product. When everything was purchased online from, I don't know, starting in like 2015 to like 2020 something, 2022, let's say, you stop like going into a store, you stop like touching the garment, you start like no one's actually like out there, like when you're looking at like a button-up shirt for a guy, like no one's like going to J.Crew anymore and touching their I don't know, their Oxford cloth button down and being like, oh, this is nicer than the one that I can get at H&M for $12. If no one's doing that, then why in the world would you ever buy the J.Crew one? There's no one really cares that much to like research it, at least. So when brick and mortar dies, the mid-range dies.
And this is also spilling into the high-end and designer fashion, which has seen a similar explosion in the sheer quantity of pieces they're putting out in their ready-to-wear collections, as opposed to previous generations. These pieces are also often frequently made in the same factories or using similar methods to lower-end brands, even as the prices of luxury goods have been steadily increasing since the pandemic. From CNN, quote, luxury companies began to charge more during the pandemic as greater personal savings and financial stimulus led shoppers to spend heavily on high-end products. products. Now luxury prices in Europe are at least 52% higher than they were in just 2019, according to HSBC. But how did even nice clothes suddenly become fast fashion? Well, part of it is that we simply consume way more clothing than we used to. We're buying on average more than 5 times the quantity of clothing that someone just 2 generations ago would have bought. The average person buys about 70 new apparel items per year, a number that has exploded in recent decades. And part of that is because, as we mentioned, we have much bigger homes to fill. Quote, we likely have more than 5 times as many clothing items as we did in the first part of the 20th century. We're also much more accustomed to getting rid of clothes at a much faster pace than ever before. As we're buying so much more, we're discarding so much more to make room for it. And just like appliances are no longer being built for the average person to be able to repair them, lest we forget, most of these appliances used to come with literal repair guides and in some cases repair tools so that small repairs could be made at home. Similarly, almost everyone has completely lost the art of making minor repairs on their own clothing, or even knowing how to properly care for them. Most of us don't even read the tag when we buy an item. We just throw it into the washer and then into the dryer, which, I'm sorry, this is maybe like the part of my brain that, lived in Europe for a few years and is like, call me pretentious if you will, but like 90% of clothes should not go in a drying machine. They should be hung up to dry. Like that alone will completely change the game as far as the longevity of your clothes. But just like with every other category, we're buying so much more and discarding so much more to make room for the new stuff and no longer feel an ethical or practical obligation to invest in what we already have. And the trend-driven fashion cycles operating at breakneck speed, which is just as much an issue in higher end fashion, which has a similar level of micro-seasonality, has convinced us that staying on trend is more important than actually getting use out of the clothing we already have.
Lizzie McGuire, you are an outfit repeater.
We've always had a kind of like status quo of what it means to be stylish via editorial or other avenues. We go back and it was, you looked at Vogue or you looked at, I don't know, Cosmopolitan, Vanity Fair, whoever was putting together an editorial or an advertisement, and this was like the way that like high fashion was supposed to look at that time. Now it's clearly so much more democratic. So everyone is like, it's like a barrage of people who have their own personal style. You're always seeing the idea of someone with really good style online. You have no idea how they came to that style. You have no idea how long it took them to like develop it, or if it was just literally like given to them by a fast fashion company. For the influx of influencers as a genre of person in the fashion space has really, it has at least like widened the view of what personal style can be. And when you have not just one tastemaker or 5 tastemakers, you have everyone is a, I don't know, what's the word for that? Like an inventor is a, something of an arbiter of taste. Everyone's an arbiter of taste now. So if everyone's an arbiter of taste and everyone has their opinions on what is stylish, and you're able to see all of that instantaneously in the span of like 20 minutes by scrolling, then therefore you're like, you feel the need to like latch on to so much more than you used to before.
So for more expensive brands that are trying to sell us way too much stuff at a much higher price point, the focus is now increasingly on storytelling around the brand and myth-making as to the inherent value of the product. The foundations of any Veblen good, which is basically an item that is more covetable the more expensive it is. And it's important to note that all of this sort of like artisanal craftsmanship legacy-based marketing is pretty ironic when you consider that there's good data showing that a higher priced item does not at all necessarily convert to durability anymore. Quote, there isn't a correlation between price and durability, said Alex Robinson, CEO of Hubbub, adding that another interesting finding had been consumer attitudes toward clothing prices. Consumer polling showed that not only do people believe that more expensive clothes are better quality, but that they are more likely to look after more expensive clothes. Robinson said that a self-fulfilling prophecy occurs and may contribute to durability, meaning that we maintain expensive clothes carefully, giving the false impression that they are inherently better quality. This research proves that all clothes deserve to be cared for, irrespective of price. It's also worth noting that even outside of the apparel space, more and more things are being considered luxury products, only amplifying the pre-existing saturation of the market.
Instead of a trend cycle of like something in skirts or in pants or in coats lasting 5-6 years, it now lasts, I don't know, like 1 to 3. So therefore, you don't have the ability to work with the same manufacturers and same producers to like like perfect like all of these aspects of those garments.
Quote, part of the explosion in luxury profits is due to the fact that there's a lot more upscale stuff to buy. Luxury was once confined to traditional categories such as clothing, accessories, wines, and cars, but no longer. In the past few years, there's also been an insatiable appetite for high-end kitchenware and other home goods. A $420 Le Creuset Dutch oven, a $1,500 Breville espresso maker, a $1,500 Thermomix blender, and a $110 Aesop candle smelling of vetiver, frankincense, and wealth. And this is dark to say, but worth noting that another reason why the quality of quote-unquote designer items has been slipping so much in recent years is because a lot of poorer people buy them, which means these brands often have an easier time getting away with making lower quality products.
All these companies, LVMH, Kering, Richemont, all three of these conglomerates are publicly traded and need to make money every year, need to make more money for their shareholders or else they get angry. They need to consistently expand. They need to find new consumers. They need to sell new products, or they need to sell more of the same products for higher margins. The only way to do this is to increase your prices, decrease your costs, and and then change the amount of people that are actually purchasing these things, increase your quantity. So through those three things, all three of them can be happening at the same time, but there's no way to. It's really difficult to do all those things, and I think we've kind of reached a tipping point while maintaining the idea of luxury and in luxury in like perhaps like classical sense in which you're saying something that is exclusive. I don't think a like Gucci monogram bag is like necessarily exclusive anymore. There's, I mean, only certain people can like afford them, but like it's the amount of people that are buying them, and probably like the like general population is probably higher than it was 30 years ago, and definitely higher than it was 20 years before that. How to maintain exclusivity? I just don't think they are.
It's also interesting to note in this same research that millennials and especially Gen Z are averaging more luxury purchases made at younger ages than previous generations, especially Gen Z. But younger consumers and ones who are not necessarily in a luxury tax bracket are not often going to have the eye to spot what truly makes a luxury product, and are often just purchasing it for the status that the brand confers, less so about the quality or durability of the product. Quote, a not insignificant portion of the growth in the luxury sector comes from middle and low-income consumers. According to global data, Americans with a household income of less than $50,000 make up about 27% of regular luxury consumers. That is almost as big a group as luxury consumers with an income of over $150,000 a year. We're gonna say credit card debt, we're gonna say you're maybe living at home with your parents and putting all of your money into like a Gucci belt or, a nice car lease. It's like really hard for me as someone who doesn't own any designer clothing whatsoever. That's not true. I own one Fendi item, and it's a bag from the 1980s that I got in a thrift store for like $100. But other than that, I've never had a luxury item, like clothing item, so it's really, really hard for me to put myself in the mindset of people who are buying like Louis Vuitton bags and stuff. And by the way, when I got myself into all kinds of credit card debt, this is not to say that my purchases were not also dumb as hell. It just wasn't oriented toward buying designer items. So if you're someone who makes less than $50,000 a year and buys or used to buy a lot of designer items, pop off in the comments. Share with the class. Why were you doing that? So if everything is bad, what do we buy? The answer is a few things. First and foremost, we need to buy fewer things, period, and make much better use of what we already have. As discussed above, the durability of clothes is actually much more tied to how well you care for a piece than the price of the piece itself. We also want to shop secondhand wherever possible because it will usually be the best option for quote-unquote new purchases, both for sustainability reasons and because older clothes are likely to be made higher quality, both for the reasons we discussed above and because if something made it to the point of resale or thrifting over many years, it was probably a better constructed piece to begin with.
I'ma take your grandpa style. I'ma take your grandpa style.
And remember that when we are buying something new, price does not necessarily impact quality. Think about what you will use the most long term, what fits best into your existing wardrobe, and eschew ultra trendy pieces whenever possible. Now, clothing may be one of the categories where we can see this rapid decline in quality because we're quite literally wearing it on our bodies every day. But another area that we're probably all familiar with when it comes to cheap being the new normal, if you've traveled at all in the past few years, is the travel industry. Which brings us to chapter 3, everyone will travel and no one will like it.
Nothing beats a Jet2 holiday. And right now, you can save £50 per person. That's £200 off for a family of 4. we've got millions of free child place holidays available.
So there's a reason why the Jet2 holiday ad became kind of the defining audio of summer 2025. Cheap travel has taken over our lives. Air travel, for example, used to be a luxury only the highest classes could afford, and even then only very occasionally. But over the past century of air travel, flying has steadily become more and more affordable, with much of that coming from saving on the actual experience itself, which is no longer luxury for the vast majority of travelers, and maximizing profits for the airlines while cutting corners on everything from passenger experience to employee wages. One need only look at the recent Air Canada strike and subsequent victory for the workers to see just how much the profitability of these companies is totally decoupled from the experience of the people making them profitable. And quote, despite occasional price increases, the average cost of a plane ticket in real inflation-adjusted terms has fallen dramatically. For example, the average domestic airfare in 1995 cost about $584 in 2023 dollars, but the average fare in 2023 was $382, a decrease of nearly 35%. And by the mid-90s, air travel had already rapidly fallen in price compared to a few decades prior.
It makes a lot of things that in the past were non-accessible to a lot of people now way more accessible. But what we have to think of and remember is that there is such a thing as something called like pricing psychology, where in the human mind, we value things more inherently that we have to pay more for. We just do. And so when you have things like travel or like entertainment experiences or hotels or whatever it is that are just becoming way cheaper, yes, we're able to do them more, which is fantastic, but we don't necessarily value them as much. And so we very much get into this quantity over quality mindset where, it's like, okay, well, instead of taking one, fantastic trip every single year, I'm going to take 4 or 5, right? And I'm going to kind of like cheap out the whole way. And, it's just going to be like a less than stellar experience because we just kind of get into that notion of, oh my gosh, everything's so cheap, everything's so cheap. And it's kind of this notion where like, we're always advertised like cheap airfare and cheap hotel and cheap this and cheap that. And there's something about it that just we gravitate towards it. And it's almost kind of this notion of the almost kind of like urgency that it instills in us of like, oh my gosh, this is so cheap. I have to take advantage of it now before it gets to be more expensive. And so again, whether we're talking about travel or whether we're talking about, a concert or an experience or an Airbnb or whatever it is, when we see these lower prices, especially when they're marked like discounted down, or especially this is very common in the entertainment space when we're shown like there's only 3 left, there's only 2 left, you better book it now. We get into these mindsets where we're spending money and we are doing things not out of an actual sense of like a true desire to do it, but more of a place of like scarcity, urgency, and panic of like, I've got to do this now, or like, I'm never going to be able to. So there's like, yes, there's things and stuff. And then you always hear people say with money, I hear this all the time in my world, like, well, if you're going to spend money, don't spend money on physical things, right? Like spend money on experiences, right? But I've seen it in my world a million times. I always say that like what you are spending your money on, whether you're actually spending your money on like a physical thing, like a sweater, or you're spending it on an airplane ticket, the what is far less important. You can still overspend. You can still go into credit card debt. You can still be spending your money like for the wrong reasons, so to speak, like spending it out of like panic and fear, again, whether we're talking about something physical or whether we're talking about an actual experience.
We've also seen the replacement of hotels with Airbnbs, which in addition to decimating the actual rental market in many major cities, has severely impacted the quality of the hospitality industry. Because while some Airbnbs still may be cheaper than hotels, that no longer seems to be the case on average. In fact, hotels are now very frequently the cheaper option, especially when traveling to major cities. Quote, the research found that hotels were cheaper in every single capital city it reviewed, including Amsterdam, which had an $83 difference, Singapore and London with $75 differences, and Dubai with a $70 difference. It even found that in San Francisco, the city where Airbnb was founded, travelers could save $44 by booking a hotel over an apartment on Airbnb. And during this time, Airbnb has also pushed forward a massive decline in the experience and standards of the hotel stay. Because lest we forget, Airbnb has always been positioned as an alternative to hotels. So they are competing directly with each other and, in many cases, directly impacting the quality of each other's offerings. As I love to do, I'm gonna throw to myself on the topic.
Like, I still sometimes use Airbnb because I'm going with a large group or for a long period of time, but pound for pound, it may be the worst thing to ever happen to travel, and I include Ryanair in that statement. Like, aside from decimating the housing/long-term rental market in most major cities, it's also just a terribly unpleasant experience. Like, sometimes you luck out, but half the time you feel like you're paying $200 a night for the privilege of intruding on some random person's apartment. Like, the last several Airbnbs I've stayed at have been literally covered top to bottom in sticky notes of shit you're not supposed to touch or do. And then like a 3-page long binder full of rules of how to clean up after the fact, when I thought I was already paying several $100s for a cleaning fee. And you used to suck it up because it was drastically less expensive than hotels, but now it's basically orders of magnitude worse for the same price. Like, I just checked into a hotel, which I can do at any time of day, and I was greeted by a welcome drink and a bellhop, and the package that I had delivered 2 days ago waiting in my room, instead of having an awkward conversation with the random friend of a person who's illegally subletting their apartment on Airbnb. Anyway, I know Airbnb has achieved enough market saturation to gaslight us into thinking we deserve no standards in terms of accommodation, but we should remember that that is not normal. We deserve hotels.
We can see the bait and switch of the Airbnb model, for example, paying a cleaning fee and then being given a list of chores to complete before checkout, seeping into the hotel model, where things that used to be considered baseline aspects of the experience, such as having a refrigerator to store your own food, are now becoming upcharges at every turn. Check-in times are becoming later, checkout is becoming earlier, and the overall experience is steadily declining because, among many other things, the market of accommodations is now oversaturated with cheap, poorly regulated hosts who often don't even realize that they're in the hospitality industry. I would like to complain about a recent Airbnb experience.
What is this? Naughty pie!
I will often book Airbnbs when I'm traveling so that it's easier to film in them, because it's not always very easy to film in hotels, the rooms are too small, etc. So I booked this Airbnb in Paris and I get off the train. Now, this Airbnb I now suspect was an illegal sublet, and there were all kinds of like rules that they had to accommodate to, like, I guess, sneak me in and make sure that I like went over the house protocol, which is apparently like a 30-minute long workshop that I was supposed to take. By the way, not with the girl who actually lived in this apartment, but with her friend that she was, I guess, like paying to coordinate this. Anyway, long story short, I'm taking a train to Paris, and my train was supposed to arrive around 5 p.m. and then I had a dinner at 7:30. So I was going to get off the train, go to this Airbnb, sit through the presentation, I guess, on like the house rules, and then go to my dinner. The train is delayed by almost 2 hours, so I barely have enough time to get to the dinner itself. I'm texting the owner of this Airbnb, who this entire time is in Canada, and I'm saying, my train is 2 hours late. I'm not gonna be able to come by the Airbnb first and then go to my dinner reservation, so I'll just go to dinner and I can just take the keys out of the lockbox, and your friend can come by to give me the house presentation either after my dinner or the following morning. She tells me under no uncertain terms I cannot check into the apartment unless I sit through the presentation, because it is a rule of her building, and that she will cancel the reservation if I don't go and do that. So I had to miss my dinner. I literally had to cancel on my friend and say, I can't come to dinner anymore. I'm so sorry, because I have to go to this Airbnb to sit through this presentation. And then the kicker is I was 10 minutes from the apartment building and she said, oh, my friend actually is no longer available. We'll do the presentation another time. I never got that presentation, by the way. Also, when I was in that apartment, every single surface was covered with multiple labels of things I wasn't supposed to touch or instructions on how to do things. To which I say, first of all, bitch, you need to get out of the hospitality business, stat. Also, everyone needs to report you to your landlord, because this is clearly some kind of illegal sublet. Like, there were like instructions on like, don't talk to certain people, like don't tell anyone, like say you're a friend, like crazy shit. And this, by the way, this apartment was almost $300 a night. I truly was left with such a sour taste in my mouth that I was like, I'm gonna find this bitch on like actual social media and be like, I'm not gonna say you should be in prison, but you should definitely be serving community service for what you are doing to people via Airbnb. For more money than a hotel. Okay, I'm sorry. But point being, the model of travel has now often become cheap up front, but it'll cost you in the long run. We often will now see low prices on our screens when we go to book, and travel has become more of a consumer good than ever, especially for younger generations, so we're booking quite a lot. But the costs add up by the time we're actually traveling, and all for for an increasingly terrible experience. In the case of hotels and Airbnbs, the price that is listed is very far from the actual price you end up paying when all of the taxes, fees, and services are added onto it. Not to mention the things you get nickel and dimed for when you're finally actually in the space. But we need to loop back to air travel, because that is probably the industry in which this bait and switch is most visible. Because one impact of the general degradation of travel is making the points and loyalty programs that were once something geared toward a fairly niche group of travelers into something that is essentially required to not have a terrible experience while traveling. Often everything from baggage to boarding times to in-flight entertainment is tied up with status now, and not just a baseline expectation of buying a ticket, even with higher-end airlines. And having status in some ways makes us feel more entitled, but it ultimately holds no weight. It just means that you've spent X amount of money with a particular credit card or airline, and these places can simply change the rules whenever they want, and thanks to the sunk cost fallacy, it won't necessarily affect their bottom line. For example, last year Delta announced there would be big changes to lounge access for SkyMiles members and Delta-affiliated Amex cardholders, thanks to lounges being essentially overrun and limiting access for members who previously had unlimited lounge access, one of the biggest perks for the airline's loyalty program.
Lady, no woman's ever gotten into this club, and no woman's ever gonna figure out how.
Basically, you're expected to now ultra optimize with a single airline just to be able to board in a relatively normal fashion and have a piece of carry-on luggage with you, or maybe have access to movies on the flight. Airline status used to mean something. But if we're going to talk about things that seem aspirational from the outside but are actually rather shitty once you look at the details, such as having status with a particular airline, perhaps nowhere is this phenomenon more visible than in the homes that we buy, which brings us to chapter 4, why do we all live in Barbie dream houses now? So let's talk about our homes, because when I say we are all living in Barbie dream houses, I don't mean that they're good. I mean that they might look impressive from a distance, but they are made out of plastic. We have systematically swapped solid, heirloom quality wood for a world of flat pack everything.
First of all, you look at the instructions, I get concerned. Like, so many times I put things in the wrong way round.
I start building it, and I was reading first step for about half an hour.
This is the era of fast furniture, an endless parade of ready-to-assemble pieces from Wayfair or Amazon, built from particle board, laminate, and MDF, which is basically just glorified sawdust held together with glue. The appeal is obvious. It's cheap to make, cheap to ship, and you can furnish an entire apartment in a single weekend. But the downside is that it has a structural integrity of a cardboard box and the lifespan of a fruit fly. This stuff is not designed to survive a single move, let alone be passed down for generations like old furniture was.
They literally put pressed board with laminate on top. So if I was to try to sand this off, I would just immediately eat down to pressed board or particle board.
And so furniture waste has surged into the millions of tons annually, with the final resting place for that wobbly bookcase being a landfill and never a secondhand shop. Now, I have spoken at length about the fact that I used to live in a home that was like 80% furnished with IKEA and Wayfair and Amazon, and now today there's basically none of that in my apartment, and almost everything that I have was bought secondhand. A lot of that on Facebook Marketplace, sometimes on the street on bulk pickup day for free, a lot of thrift stores and flea markets. But the point is, I basically never buy a furniture item new anymore unless I absolutely have to. And even things that I'm buying kind of quote unquote new, like the sideboard that I have behind my couch, where I really wanted some very specific specifications, dimensions, etc. to fit the space, you can still buy a version of secondhand with websites like Apartment Deco, which is essentially just like a reseller website where people sell gently used, more recent furniture items. I also have things in my apartment like floor models, which are literally just the models of furniture that a given store will have on the sales floor, that you can usually get for like a 50% or more discount because it often has minor imperfections like nicks or scratches. The point is though, as I mentioned in a recent TikTok on the subject about my rules for secondhand shopping, which I'll link you to below, once you make the mindset switch to shopping secondhand for furniture, not only do you realize that often buying secondhand is a fraction of the price of even the cheap new stuff, especially considering all the stuff you can get for free on places like Buy Nothing groups, but that you are almost always inherently buying much better quality. In addition to the stuff often being cuter and more original, like it is literally built much better. Because at this point, given how crappy the majority of our actual furniture is, and how much it's not meant to be disassembled once, let alone multiple times, if something has made it to a thrift store in a state to be bought again, that means it's probably much better made. And what about the houses around the furniture? Well, spoiler alert, they just got bigger, not better.
Is this real life, or am I dreaming? Pinch me. Look at this little couch. It is a full-on replica.
The design brief for so many modern suburban homes is essentially a maximum square footage for minimum cost. We are in the age of the McMansion, even for homes that are not technically themselves mansion size. All of the key design and construction aspects that define a McMansion have seeped their way into basically every new housing development. They're a jumble of mismatched windows and finishes and a roofline that looks like a geometry problem gone wrong. They're often made with shoddy construction materials and hastily put together by a team that's not really checking for quality. And their value lives in their optics, things like the soaring entryway, a cavernous great room, not the material, not the details. The interiors are often a sea of builder grade, things like those horrendous millennial gray floors or hollow core doors that feel like you could punch a hole through them. This creates a vicious feedback loop, with bigger, emptier houses demanding more stuff to fill it and fueling our consumption of the very fast furniture that will soon fall apart in a few years, forcing us to buy more ugly trend pieces.
So as somebody who lives in the Dallas, Texas area, which is kind of like the capital of, McMansion land, it's just so fascinating when you look back even a couple of decades, just how much bigger home sizes have gotten. There's something called Parkinson's Law, which I find really interesting. Parkinson's Law actually has to do with time, but I think it's very relevant to our money and our stuff. Parkinson's Law essentially says that the amount of time that you give yourself to do something, the time will expand that container. When you have a living space that's just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, we just have a natural inclination to fill up that space and to fill up that container. And so it's almost kind of like having empty rooms in your home. I mean, I feel like it's just kind of like this known thing where, you have an overflowing basement or an overflowing attic, or you have an overflow room, or, you have a playroom that you have to fill. I was talking to someone recently who actually does home design. She builds homes for people. And she was like, the requests that I have gotten for just the most kind of insane rooms now in houses, she's like, everybody wants a gift wrapping room in their house. She's like, you don't need a gift wrapping room. She's like, everybody wants an in-home gym. They want an in-home sauna. They want a gift wrapping room. They want a playroom. They want an entertainment room. And so, of course, with all of these different rooms comes all of these different stuffs and appliances and, crafts and all this other stuff that you need to fill it up that, frankly, you end up using very, very little. And so when you have this space that you just kind of feel like is huge and massive and open, our natural inclination is just to literally just go out and fill it with stuff. It's almost just kind of like this notion of well, I have a place to put it, right? And sometimes you see these videos on social media where people will have shelves of tumblers, or they'll have, walls of salt scrubs, or they'll have just drawers of, beauty products. A beauty room is another one that she said that a lot of people are requesting, specifically just a room where you can just go in and keep all your beauty products and get ready for the day.
But we're in our empty McMansion, our little Barbie dream house that might have very impressive looking details, but is essentially made of plastic when you knock on anything. And we're sitting down at our dining table made of compressed sawdust and glue. So what are we eating? Well, we have to look at Chapter 5. Food quality, a very yummy dystopia. So this philosophy of more, cheaper, and faster does not stop with the clothes that we wear or the living rooms we sit in. It has completely transformed what we eat. Food has followed the exact same playbook as fast fashion. The stars of this show are ultra-processed foods, or UPFs, which are less like food and more like edible science experiments, engineered for a bliss point of perfect craveability, an unnaturally long shelf life, and a rock-bottom price. Today, US adults get a majority of their calories from these foods, and the health outcomes are
not great, Bob.
Large-scale studies have consistently linked higher UPF intake with higher rates of basically every bad thing you can think of. A huge part of the appeal is economic. Calorie for calorie, a bag of Doritos or frozen pizza is dramatically cheaper than fresh fruit, vegetables, and lean protein. Plus, nature does not produce the taste of Fruit Riot. This tilts our choices toward the very things that are easiest to mass produce and most profitable for giant corporations. Now, was it always this way? The short answer is no. So it's important to note that fast food has existed for decades, and often when people are going to push back on this insistence that something very fundamental in the way that we eat has changed, they'll point to the fact that people were eating McDonald's in the 1960s and their health outcomes looked basically nothing like what we have today. But even people my age are able to remember a time when this food was very different. Perhaps nowhere more noticeably than in the sheer portion sizes, which is, by the way, not at all limited to fast food. Basically, any dining out or ordering in experience now is essentially going to entail receiving a meal that could feed 3 to 4 people for one single order, which would be great and kind of a budget sleigh if people were just then portioning it out and eating it over several meals, but that's generally not the case.
Oh, here come the meat sweats.
We may have erased it from our collective memory due to its ultra-problematic creator and star Morgan Spurlock, RIP, but the 2004 documentary Super Size Me, while being a bit of a flashpoint at the time, literally getting McDonald's, among other things, to remove the supersize option from its menu, does not seem to have actually changed our relationship to the insane portion sizes it was pointing out all the way 20 years ago. In fact, since the film, portion sizes have actually grown. The food has become more energy dense, and its sheer ubiquity is staggering. And when you mix all of this with hyper-targeted marketing, celebrity endorsements, and seasonal product drops that mimic fast fashion, looking at you, pumpkin spice everything / the never-ending celebrity collabs with fast food restaurants, and you get a food system that runs on churn, constant novelty, high volume, and profits that are built on getting you to come back for more tomorrow. On top of it all, the basic systems of food safety oversight are already strained and now being systemically dismantled. With fewer federal inspectors and a global supply chain of dizzying complexity, we're all playing a low-stakes game of salmonella roulette every time we go to the grocery store. Because let's be very clear, if food brands and restaurants and chains are going to be able to sell so much more product at an increasingly lower price, they're going to have to cut corners somewhere. And 9 times out of 10, that's going to be in the quality of the product itself, and often its actual safety. Now, in all of these categories, in our travel and food and the homes that we live in and the food we eat, there is more and more a clear marker of class that is based around being able to opt out of all of these things. For example, when it comes to food in an era of increasingly cheap and nutritional void and calorically dense food being hyper available, being thin and in good health is increasingly a status symbol. In fact, things like weight and many other health outcomes now very clearly map onto people's socioeconomic status. And more affluent individuals will often make a point of eschewing all of these things, opting to go to local farmers markets and high-end organic stores to source their food, not allowing any of these ultra-processed items into their kitchen, and just generally expending their class privilege on the ability to simply not eat like poor people. But in many cases, the ultimate expression of luxury becomes the ability to not buy at all. Which brings us to our final chapter, Performative Minimalism, the ultimate luxury. In an age of hyperconsumption, a very bastardized idea of what minimalism is supposed to be has become the ultimate status symbol. This is the quiet luxury that you'll see on shows like Succession, which is often expressed in an aesthetic of extremely expensive restraint.
She's brought in ludicrously capacious bags. What's even in there? Huh? Flat shoes for the subway?
We've talked about it before on the channel, but the entire concepts of things like quiet luxury or old money style often just signify that things are more visually discreet while still being enormously expensive, and as we discussed, often made in similarly cheap or unsustainable ways. And also, as we mentioned earlier in this video, luxury brands are increasingly making their profits by marketing what they have to much lower income individuals. And if status is often expressed through consumer choices, which let's be very clear, it absolutely is for even the wealthiest people, if lower income people are suddenly able to purchase the same luxury brands that higher income individuals can, well, they then need to move to higher ground because the flood is coming. Now, sometimes this will manifest in a level of discretion within the same brands. For example, a lower income person might go out of their way to buy something that has an actual brand logo on it to designate to others that they have bought something of luxury status, while a very high income individual may buy an item from that same brand, but from, let's say, their couture collection, or even something from their ready to wear that doesn't necessarily demonstrate the visible label. There are also ultra luxury brands that go out of their way to have a more minimalist or quote unquote unclockable aesthetic, which resonates with people from a very high socioeconomic status who are interested in that sort of thing, but are not necessarily going to scan to, let's say, the average person riding the subway in the morning. Brands like Brunello Cucinelli or Loro Piana, both of which are heavily featured on shows like Succession. Perhaps a brand like The Row most typifies this, selling the idea of being above it all in the form of a simple, logo-free sweater that just happens to cost $2,000. And the design apex of this was without a doubt the Kim Kardashian and Kanye West minimal monastery home famously featured in Architectural Digest. It was a vast, empty-looking space of pale stone and unsettlingly bare hallways, an interior that looked like a high-concept art gallery or maybe just a very expensive mental institution. And we can even see how opting out has become a way to flex status in, for example, the fact that few things are more socially validated in the upper classes than people, women especially, being extremely thin. It's not just about buying the nice food, it's about not eating the food at all. Or when we think about how the wealthy travel, it is often by prioritizing a maximum level of discretion. They don't want to fly with other people or stay in the same hotels as other people, or even have to pass them in the hallway on their way there. While much of the mid-level consumer market is often oriented towards showing others what you've bought and ensuring that its value is highly visible, for the ultra-wealthy, discretion and anonymity are the most valuable factors.
Karen, it's you.
I'm sorry, you must have mistaken me for somebody else. My name is Anastasia Beaverhausen.
Now, you'll occasionally get ultra-wealthy people like your Becca Blooms who for some reason love to both go on million-dollar honeymoons and also meticulously post every detail about it, but that's very unusual behavior for someone of that income level. If nothing else, Diva, are you not worried about getting robbed? These celebrities have to stop posting their every move because I'm not necessarily here to victim blame robbery victims, but at the same time, like, if you're constantly posting live and direct where you are throughout the world while also flaunting that you've got like $600,000 worth of jewelry on your body, like, I'm just saying, if I was trying to burgle someone, I would just look at certain Instagrams. Bring back the bling ring. What, Alexis Nyers, we've never needed you so much. Some of these influencers, I'm not gonna go there.
Every time you I have to re-record it!
Yeah, also, like, aren't you divas worried about a class uprising? I mean, if I was regularly posting from a 9-figure mega yacht, I would be a little concerned that all of the, the unwashed masses who can barely afford to pay rent would not be too happy about that. I don't know. I think the lure of being social media famous for some people is stronger than their own bodily safety. But anyway, point being, for many of the wealthiest among us, a performative opting out of the excesses of consumer culture has itself become a luxury item. But it's important to remember that just because the item someone is buying is more discreet or less well known to the masses does not mean that it is less consumerist or less destructive to the environment. In fact, we've recently found that the top 10% of wealthiest people in the world are responsible for roughly 2/3 of global emissions. And as we've discussed already, even the really expensive stuff they might be buying is not necessarily going to be better quality. In fact, it often comes down much more to how you take care of an item than how much you actually paid for it. At the end of the day, things have gotten very cheap, and this has warped our perception of both consumerism and our own standards enormously. People used to buy things with the expectation that they would last. People used to have a strong sense of what the value of an experience was, whether that was flying on a plane or staying at a hotel. People used to live in much smaller homes and buy many fewer things to fill it. They didn't have an expectation of being able to do a costume change every day like they were a sitcom character. And even the food they put on their own tables, even when it was fast food, used to be of better quality. At the end of the day, you are not going crazy. The quality of many, many things is declining around you, and you are now often having to pay a surplus for what used to be a premium experience just to get the bare minimum. But there are ways to opt out. As we discussed, some of it is policy-based, and some of it is in our own decision-making. And at the end of the day, nothing is going to be more valuable or better for you than loving what you already have. But on that note, I will see you next month for another video essay. Ciao.